Tonight on Ground Crew Command Radio, we have how the situation with Trump only got more confusing. Find out who really controls him and more. Who is really behind the engineered war in Iran, and analysis on the latest intel from Cobra. How the White Hats destroyed the cabal's ability to use China to plunge the world into an Armageddon scenario without firing a shot at China. How the 4 pinch points here on the physical plane were something that the White Hats had to deal with to get control of before they could proceed any further with planetary liberation. How what's underneath Iran is more than just a Stargate. Why one famous YouTube intuitive says we're in 2028 energies already. And why this is another sign of success from the 144K mass meditation group. And even the cabal doesn't even know what year it really is, which makes all predictions about the year of the event meaningless. That's tonight on Ground Crew Command Radio. This is your loving servant, the unknown light warrior. And we're back. This is Ground Crew Command Radio, the official speaking platform for the 144K Mass Meditation, aka Starseed Group. Well, here in the US, they have the No Kings protests that appear to be nationwide. And don't be perturbed by any negative energies because, they usually do rituals attacking key star seeds to complement and support any significant moves on the physical plane, such as the No Kings protests. My partner saw that they were all holding perfectly, well-made Mickey Mouse perfect kind of signs that are clearly not homemade. The usual CIA games. It's mostly organized and implemented through the CIA and MK Ultra victims. Nothing new there. We move on. It's an annoyance at the most. So that's the kind of Saturday morning we find ourselves in. And clearly it's not going to save them, not by any stretch. They have fewer and fewer tools, resources, abilities as the weeks and months roll on. And that includes their black magic psychic attack abilities. They made a rather feeble and lame attempt to, shall we say, attack my partner and I. It was barely an annoyance. But again, they always do rituals before any kind of operation, whether it's a false flag, whether it's a firing up of some ancient artifact they managed to find, whether on the right date, whether it's protests, by a very tiny minority of predominantly MK Ultra victims. All right, predominantly. They're also paid as well. So with that out of the way, it's interesting. Just before this show, Cobra made a new post There's some question marks about it, and I'll get into that in a moment. Well, I'll get into it now because Cobra did make some statements about Trump. And, so I'll that's another big long story in and of itself, but I'll just start from the start. Trump's original higher purpose was to, at least in the public sense, I guess, be the figurehead, but also the energy, the anchor point to lead us out of a dark age and into a neutral age. Now, in recent years, because of how almost irretrievable and beyond ridiculous everything got, how out of hand and out of control everything got, and that's source's perspective, it was decided to shift that role, his role, and his soul, by the way, to shift it from pulling us out of a dark age to a neutral age, but into a light age, not a neutral age, a light age. And that's only happened in the past maybe 10 years. So his was a ever-evolving process where, as Gene Decode said, he was groomed for this role from a young age to eventually be president. But and this includes darkness's perspective, to get us into a neutral age, because the dark age was ending regardless. So in other words, there would have been still a radical improvement in life, in our life, down to the physical surface. There would have been reintegration back to galactic society, probably slower. But the various dark AI gods or levels of dark AI, they still would have been around. There still would have been duality. There still would have been this tit for tat wars and battles between positive ETs and negative ETs and, a neutral age. So dualism would have still been here, even though a neutral age would be far better than the dark age that we're coming out of. So with Trump, both positive and negative sides were always involved through timeline interference, replacement of Trump with their version of Trump. Both sides were doing that. And that's why it's so complicated and convoluted, just like the whole story itself. And at a certain point, Trump was generally consciously working for the light side, but he's still with the positive military, and to a degree, whether he knew it or not, positive ETs. And this was long before he was approached by the military to run for president in 2015. His job was he was still part of the infiltration program in reverse, meaning positive military predominantly infiltrating the dark societies and groups. He was one of those infiltrators. He had to become a rich, famous, and popular celebrity. He had to be on the inside. You've heard the term turncoats a lot. Moles that Drake used to talk about as far back as 2012, etc. He was one of those moles. Now, being a mole, and infiltrating is a rather unpleasant experience, because you do have to do some bad things to be convincing, to rise up within the echelons of power, within the overall cabal structure and overall or whatever secret society one is a part of. You have to do it from the inside. You have to have people on the inside, otherwise it won't work. We wouldn't be alive. Forget it. And both him and Putin got some rehabilitation. And some say their souls were either transmuted, healed, or a light soul was moved in. Again, kind of complicated and messy, right? While that complication and messiness is deliberate to keep the dark side in the dark. If we don't know what we're dealing with, then chances are they don't either. Welcome to the cloak and dagger game that we're in. That's just the nature of the beast. So, Cobra mentioned that he attended the Jesuit university, can't remember the name of it, in 1966 briefly, where he was MK Ultra'd. And so 1966, he was about, 18 years old? Or 28, I'm sorry. Now, the thing with that is with MK trauma-based mind control system to create that split personality, and they control and program that split personality or alternate personality, is that they're usually done to kids, little kids, by the age of 7 for it to really work. So I'm just saying that raised a question mark as to whether he was put through the process to create an alternate personality at an adult age. Maybe that does happen. I don't know, but if that does happen, this is the first time I'm hearing it. My understanding is it has to be done by a certain very young age, certainly by the age of 7, for it to work well and be controllable and effective. So, yeah, just think about that. By the time he did go to the Jesuit university, first of all, the Jesuits pretty much controlled all universities and colleges by then. My partner attended a particular Ivy League university. They're all Jesuit cabal controlled. So it doesn't quite give away much if that's all he's basing that on. So again, it's not a criticism. I'm just raising a question, raising a concern. I would never criticize Cobra. Just constructive perspective and understanding of things. So the story goes on. He's an infiltrator, either acting dark or appearing neutral, because you and actually being neutral down to the soul level. Because remember, you got to convince the highest upper echelons of primordial AI. You got to convince them as well. It's just insane, right? Huge story. So anyway, so onward he went with his dark or neutral appearance, circularly infiltrating, and keeping everyone guessing. And yet still, at least one cabal faction would still try to kill him. Some of you may remember that it was a meme with Trump, 1980 version of Trump, and him being quoted as saying, "Why are these time travelers trying to kill me?" Okay. So I guess not all of the cabal was convinced that they controlled him, or that he would eventually do nothing more than serve his higher purpose of moving humanity from the dark age to the neutral age. So yeah, they weren't convinced. And the story goes on. The biggest shift, and the White House, approached him because he was probably still the best option. Otherwise, I would have approached the other best option. Okay, it always had to be someone from the inside that would at some point blow their cover. And some have made the understandable accusation that while he only appeared to work for the light side or the white hats, but really he was working for the dark, etc. And now we all these fake Trumps. Okay. Well, again, if it's got us guessing, then that's good because the chances are it's got them guessing, the dark fellas. So was the cabal media always massacring him because at least one dark faction didn't control him? And so one dark faction didn't think they could control him, so they tried to kill him. Another dark faction were convinced that he ultimately works for them, etc. It's going to stay murky until like that and convoluted and with very little clarity until it's safe enough for the real truth to come out. And I'm going to give my personal take or analysis on the real truth because he had to, I mean, even Gene Tico said he has to appear like the ultimate flip-flopper that keeps even the smartest minds guessing, while only the so-called top 10 most senior white hats really knowing the truth, along with positive ETs. And even at the positive ET level, it's a bit of a tightly kept secret as well, because there's been a bit of infiltration there as well. So let me see how I can articulate this to bring clarity. He has to appear friendly to most sides, I'm going to say. Okay. Like he's working for them. There's currently 3 fake Trumps. The body doubled from years ago died, but there's probably clones, and some are AI constructs on TV, or as if he's on TV. There's at least 3 of them. One hangs around a lot with the Khazarian Zionists, the Zionist faction, acting like he's working for them, friendly to them, but really is, again, a double agent situation. And oops, I'm getting resistance here. We're getting opposition. Sorry, I can't quite go that far, as if he's talking to the Zionists. Another dark faction, he's appearing friendly to them. But oops, he can only go so far. There's too much opposition from the white hats. I'll do what I can, kind of thing. And then another dark faction. Well, he's trying to work hard for them, but damn, I'm getting a lot of opposition here from the positive military and positive ETs. Let's try this now. We'll try. All the while, there's always deliberate sort of sabotage going on to one degree or another, or it's successfully preempted. Because any Trump clone or double is ultimately a double agent being directed a certain way to only go so far for any negative faction that is apparently working for. According to Q, the Storm Rider, the real Trump he says is underneath and very well protected, highly insulated, probably in a temporal bubble, I suspect, underneath Cheyenne. Okay, he disclosed that some time ago last year, and effectively insulated, along with his family. All right. And that's where things are really run. That's where operations are really run for. I mean, even Simon Parkes said back in 2024, there's no way known when he was getting pulled into court, arrested and pulled into court and in those court trials. And you'll see those drawings of Trump in the court, right? You know, Simon Parkes says that there's no way known the White Hats would allow the real Trump to go into court, to go anywhere on the surface of the planet. Now, underneath Cheyenne Mountain, if he's not in a temporal bubble, I suspect he is with the Shambhalans or Agathans some of the time as well, with a well-established alliance there. But the real significant shift, before I finish off, that's the confusing and convoluted, multi-layered situation that can be best, like that's as much clarity as one can have and put on such a multi-layered, convoluted situation regarding Trump, or all things Trump. The defining moment when it comes to all things Trump was when Source made the decision to bypass entering a neutral age, bypass altogether, and go straight to a light age, from a dark age to a light age, straight. That's when I'm going to say something within Trump and the overall plan changed. Okay. That was a defining moment. And to my understanding, that was well after 2015 when the military had supposedly approached him. So, yep, you can continue to expect the usual ambiguousness, flip-flopping, seeming contradictions and doing the opposite thing, but only going so far. You know, a good example, back in, 2020, Operation Warp Speed, where he, on the surface at least, went absolutely out of his way to rush out and get out the, how do I say it on YouTube? That medical procedure, to get it out there to the masses as fast as possible. All right. And most of you know, well, on the surface, that looks like a complete contradiction in terms of working for the light. All right. But most of you know that forced the big pharma companies to get something that was very unprepared and for the most part harmless, 95% of it, to get that out there prematurely, and which screwed them right up. Okay, many of you know that story. So that's an example. Okay, now the war in Iran, it's how do I explain this? No, it is engineered by the cabal and the deep state to a degree, thinking that they would finally be able to start World War IV and Gog versus Magog, etc., and to get it going out of control. But behind or underneath all of that, it was a white hat engineering of that war, but their version of carrying out that war, which is ultimately to draw out deep state agents who happily went along with this, but also to take out a cabal faction that's higher and more, that controls Iran, always controlled Iran, that's higher believe it or not, and more powerful than the Zionist, Khazarian Satanist Zionist faction that controls Israel. All right. Yeah, that was a shock for me. And that's what the White Hats are doing. So they're sort of cajoling and greasing the rails for the deep state to start and make the war with Iran happen, thinking it's going to be their version of events. But no, it was another White Hat move done by stealth, tricking the deep state to have a limited war, very limited, using the Zionist Khazarian faction, because that Zionist Khazarian faction is a rival to the dark higher faction that controls Iran. So that's why they're just being used by the White Hats, whether they know it or not. So ultimately, I guess you could say, the White Hats engineered that war, just their version of it, using the deep state, who are dying for World War III, thinking they were getting their hopes high that they'll finally be able to start Gog versus Magog war. And they use that. Again, it's the classic Tai Chi movie where your opponent lunges, throws a blow at you, and you don't resist it. You actually assist it and help them with throwing that blow. You know, you step aside to a degree, obviously, but then you help them. You move their arm even faster when the opponent's arm moves to throw that blow. And lo and behold, what happens? Your opponent is now completely off balance, and they're a wide open target for you. Classic old Sun Tzu war moves. So that's what's behind the war, the engineered war in Iran. Ultimately, the White Hats. Now, interestingly, before I get into how the White Hats have knocked China out of any possible Gog versus Magog Armageddon scenario without firing a shot at China, I want to make sure I have enough time to cover, again, just some concerns that people have expressed with Cobra's post only last night. And there's a good reason why I'm going to say one public intel site or spokesperson thinks the other intel site or spokesperson is really working for the dark, when it's not necessarily the case. It's because all public intel providers, all right, the usual names you're familiar with, they can only ever have one portion of the larger picture. And that does make things hard. It only adds to an already convoluted situation where you're dealing with alternate and parallel realities, timelines, universes, etc. So the main thing, some expressed concern with Cobra's post saying or implying or getting the impression that the event is now centered on or dependent on or is only going to happen on the Pacific area, the basin or something like that. No, that's not the case. It doesn't mean that the event is now centered on that or is only going to happen there in the Pacific. It just what it really means is that it just needs more attention and grid work for the Pacific region. That's the main thing that is saying. It's a completely forgotten part of the world mainly because it's just ocean. And Lemurian energies do need to be healed and resurrected, basically brought to the surface. Now, the 144K, we've only done one mass meditation focused on Lemuria, which might be enough. And then, 2 or 3 months later, Cobra's now focusing on it very publicly, which is interesting. So it just needs a bit of focus. It just needs more grid work. All right. But some others have expressed concern about the New Earth code and New Heaven code. Okay, just go to his website if you haven't caught up on that yet. Now, make of that what you will, and I can understand concerns about whether these two keys or codes are the real McCoy, if I can borrow that expression. Because in the past, I'm going to say, some say that source was overlaid by AI. That was still very much there in 1999. And filtering or copying, both filtering and or copying whatever came from source. And that's apparently when source transmitted the key of New Heaven into this multiverse to start clearing all darkness in this multiverse, which is right up the 144K's alley. We always rise above the multiverses. All right, now you know why. So, again, because such a convoluted story, a lot more than that started happening just to clear darkness from this multiverse. All right, a lot more. That's just one of the things that started happening. So I can understand concerns about whether this code is the real McCoy or these two codes are the real McCoy. Again, a dark AI, because there's many different types of dark AIs, did make its own fake copies of it, because it does that with everything created or sent by source. But that situation has been resolved at this point, and thus this whole topic and endeavor and respective codes is ready for surface operatives like Cobra to start talking about it and using it, applying it. So the key of New Heaven, according to him, activates tunnels of light from the absolute, which brings up another question mark because no one really knows for sure what the absolute actually is. Anyway, brings tunnels of light from the absolute, a future cosmic cycle, M87 galaxy, and this galaxy's central sun, dissolving all darkness in past cosmic cycles too. What I'm going to say to that is this is just one of the operations occurring to dissolve all darkness in past cosmic cycles. And that's exciting as far as the key of New Heaven and New Earth is concerned, because it all implies, or it's an indicator that the huge issue of alternate and parallel universes, which are AI constructs, by the way, and their respective past cosmic cycles have been cleared and ended. Because if you don't take care of all these fake AI constructed alternate parallel universes within our own organic timeline and universe, it's not really going to work. You won't be ready to start clearing past universal cycles. All right, because you got to clear the fake AI constructed alternate and parallel universes within this multiverse and universe. They constantly directly interfere with us in this universe, in this Earth. You need to clear that first before you're going to be going back to past cosmic cycles. Again, it's a classic case of sequencing. Otherwise you wouldn't be ready for times like things like that. So I just want to pass on that analysis and to let you know that there's more going on than just this particular operation. It's not all centered around the key of New Heaven and New Earth, even though it's a part of it. Okay. first of all, the Golden Dome is controlled by an ascended eighth density. Ninth density is source, by the way. Eighth density, ascended plasma living light being. All right. It all has to happen in conjunction with that as well. Of course, source has to give the go ahead at the right time. So again, more than one players, more than one operation to the game. Just be aware of that. So if something seemingly contradicts something else, be slow to dismiss it, because many things can, or many operations and methodologies can exist and operate at the same time. So I want to, hopefully that help bring better understanding to this, again, multi-layered, messy situation. You know, I would never envy being a spy. I can never be a spy or an agent, because you just would never know what's really going on. Very hard. I mean, we all know those plot twists and shocks and surprises in those spy thriller movies, right? Well, there's a reason for that. They don't just do that just because it makes the movie more exciting and compelling. It's because this is the way it really is. So more intel, more information and clarity will come. But the light forces do need to keep the dark ones guessing, to not know themselves. And again, for perspective and clarity, that sometimes involves keeping us guessing and trying to work it out as well. It does serve as something of a safety mechanism for operations. So, with that analysis on last night's Cobra post out of the way, and just to be clear, the guy's a hero as far as I'm concerned. With that out of the way, how have the White House destroyed the cabal's ability to use China, more specifically the CCP, to just run amok and start war? You know, or sensibly start an attack on Taiwan, or try to intervene. Notice how they haven't really intervened or overtly intervened with the war in Iran. Well, here's what's happened. So to fight a war, a significant war, especially if you're going to fight a major war against the US or NATO, you need loads and loads of cheap, easily accessible, and secured oil. Loads of it. And if it's not secure, if it's not cheap, easily accessible, you're not going to be fighting any war. Fighting a war is what you definitely won't be doing. Okay? That's simply what it takes. Loads of oil is needed to fight a war, a major war anyway. So China had, up until this point, secured very cheap oil, and lots of it, through Venezuela and Iran. That's where it was getting 90% of its cheap, secured, accessible oil. And obviously now you've automatically put the plot together yourself, right? It's obvious. This is at least half the reason why the positive military had to take out and take control of Venezuela and its oil fields, why it had to take out Iran's ability, more so the Dark Cabal faction that controls Iran, its ability to supply China with so much oil. So China's 90%, China's two main sources of cheap, plentiful, and secured oil, gone. That by default means China cannot fight a war. Can't do it now. Even with significant reserves, can't do it. because if you're going to fight a war, you need 10 years in reserves, 10 years of stockpiled oil supplies. Gone. China, fundamentally, you can fire missiles, which the positive military can easily take care of. It's got the technology to take care of that, no issue, let alone the Golden Dome. But it can't find a war. It's out. World War IV is over just by taking out Venezuela and Iran. It was, again, half the reasons why the White House made those moves. The usual countermeasures, we're seeing them in action, and it's beautiful, isn't it? So now China, because it's going to have to start paying the same price that everyone else does with oil, it's going to stress and eventually collapse an already stressed and already collapsing internal economic system. And so the positive military has accelerated the internal implosion of China. Whereas, as many of you have heard, it'll break up into several different provinces, at least a dozen different provinces. Apparently, a couple have broken away already, apparently. CCP's in disarray now. Trying to work for the cabal, but yeah, well, if you're going to, again, no oil, no war. So that Chinese implosion is accelerated, and they're out of the picture. Which brings me on to the next point. There's about how the 4 pinch points, also known as choke points here on the physical plane, were something that the White House had to get control of before they could proceed any further with planetary liberation. So most of you will know about the Suez Canal. All right. These are the main trade routes that are kind of like the main artery systems of the world's economy. You know, trade in general, not just oil. And that is the Suez Canal, the Panama Canal, and the Strait of Hormuz, which you've been hearing about for how long? Now, there's also Gibraltar, is another pinch point. There you go. And the White Hats had to take control of those, because if the cabal still had control of even just one of them, all it would have to do is pinch it, and that arterial blood is now cut off. And what happens if that was to happen to one of your main arterial blood vessels, right? It's all over. So the White Hats have gained control of the final pinch point, main pinch point, which is the Strait of Hormuz. That's why it's been in the news for so long. And now we can safely proceed with planetary liberation. And to finish off with Iran, it had, okay. So just to be clear, I mean, I shouldn't do this. I often leave out Australia because their fuel prices have gone really astronomical. The reason why they've gone so astronomical in Australia and only much less so here in the US is in Australia, it's a much more tightly controlled state. The cabal can get away with a lot more in Australia and New Zealand in a way where it can't here in the US. Okay. So Australia, mainly 2, maybe 3 suppliers of petrol. Very easy to control. All right. It's almost like a duopoly. Um, and that's that. It's artificial. So if the fuel the effective fuel price, market price in the oil market rose by 30%, in Australia they'll put it up by 60 to 80% minimum because they can. Okay. Um, uh, that's it. That's the story of Australia. Um, yeah, very upsetting, especially if you live there. So stuff under Iran. Yes, there's magic-like tech that was interfering with the planetary liberation process. That's already been dealt with. The reason why I say that is because, more than once, Gene Decode said, if you see something or hear about something in the news, whether it's alt media or corporate media, it means it's already happened or it's 90% completed with only the 10% to finish off. So military tribunals, most of it's already done in Gitmo over the past few years. Most of it's already done. It's recorded. The bad guys have been executed. And at the right time, hopefully this year, they're simply going to start televising recordings. Okay. It's understandable that they do it that way because it's hard enough to get rid of the cabal and the massive, multi-layered, vast networks of the deep state as it was. So I can understand that. An operation isn't an operation, and that's their nature, especially when the enemy is so huge and massive in numbers. All right. So yeah, there was a Stargate, there was other stuff being dealt with underneath Iran. They really could, through quantum entanglement, attack, key starseeds, for example, with some of these contraptions they had over there, portals, that kind of thing. Again, another example of how there's always several good and big reasons why big moves are made by the positive military, the light forces. So, moving on to the famous YouTuber Intuitive that I mentioned. His name is Lee Harris. Many of you have come across him. I briefly followed him back in 2013, haven't really since, mainly because I just found his stuff nice. He's a wonderful guy, but I just found it too vague. I found following astrology for my 3 signs a lot more accurate. But anyway, the vague statement that he made recently is still a huge one to pay attention to, and that he says we're in 2028 energies already. A huge sign of success for us 144K active Starseed group, because there has been talk, okay, that the event in terms of the solar flash, mass landings, the whole shebang that we've all been trained on to expect and been waiting for, that won't happen, quote, until from December 21st to the 25th, I think 22nd to the 25th, 2031. And the first question you got to ask yourself is, okay, from when was that seen and said? How far back, how many years ago was that seen and said? Because things change. timelines keep on, thanks to the hard work that we put in every 2 weeks, every new moon and full moon, timelines keep on compounding on themselves, not just going up, but compounding. Secondly, and this is from Gene Decode as well, that the cabal doesn't really know what year it really is because it messed up the calendar so many times that even it doesn't know what year this supposed 2026 year really is. So if you got two factors there where at least the Dark Ones don't really know what year it really is, and B, from when was it, from which timeline was that witnessed that it's going to happen in December, late December 2031 in terms of the solar flash? From when did they see that? And third, the constant and thankfully consistent, because that's the secret key to it all, the consistent upgrade in timelines keeps on changing time because you're going up in densities. So by doing, I'll use us as an example because I don't know who else is doing it. By doing 1 to 2 hour psychic surgery type of mass meditations and raising the timelines, the result, seemingly every mass meditation, and then doing that every 2 weeks, it constantly raises the timeline, but that consistency in that raising has that compounding effect, right? Like compounding interest. It starts to, at some point, go exponential at a certain point. And by doing that with the timelines, you're going up in densities faster. When you go up in densities faster, time shrinks further and further. It shortens further and further into the now. Now, think of the implications of that quantum mechanic of how constantly going up in densities, if you're consistent with it, shrinks time and changes time. Because obviously at a certain point, when you go up in densities, there is no time. You're in the ever-present now and blah, blah, blah. You've heard it all before. This is why the 144K does its fundamental holy work that it does. Because it makes what to many of us would be a nightmare scenario of 2031, the event not happening till 2031 in December, a non-issue, effectively. It all comes down to raising the timelines to go up in the densities faster. And that's reliant on what you and I do every 2 weeks with the 144K mass meditations. And that's why we do what we do. Beyond critical. So that's the, I'm going to say, suggested perspective to have on that. Really, really critical. Now, if you're listening this on whatever social media platform and you haven't joined the 144K, you would be well advised to do so, to put it mildly. But check out the website at a minimum. It's the numbers 144, the letter K, armyoflight.org. We got the full moon 144K mass meditation, or mass intervention, as I like to call them. Let me see, Wednesday. I always get the dates confused, courtesy of Asperger's. Wednesday, I'll double check on that. Yeah, Wednesday, March, April 1st. Awesome, thank you. April 1st, And that is at 9 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, US. And so we should have a good attendance rate there. And we're going to push up the timelines even more. And I know it's easier said than done when I say that, that the energies are harsh, but there's a massive disentanglement, cleansing, purging, full on, going on the surface, which is bad enough, but it's also happening internally as well with all these CMEs and cosmic winds. The Golden Dome is cleaning things up and pushing forward, again, ahead of time, this whole compression breakthrough where light from underneath the surface and light from above meets in the middle on the surface. And clearly that's part of that squeeze, right? As if coming out of a birth canal. And symbolically, metaphorically, we are coming out of a birth canal. That's why it's difficult. So you'll definitely want to show up for that one. April 1st, 9 p.m. EDT. If you're not on the notifications list to get your specific time zone link to make it much easier. Again, just go to 144karmyoflight.org because the 144K are primarily active starseeds. Not everyone can make the live mass meditations. At least half of us have a 9 to 5 or other commitments. That's, of course, understandable. We are still within the matrix for now, but many can make them, and we're active. We're a very active starseed group that is just really moving things along much faster. Because at this point, with everything that's gone on, we've avoided the most dangerous periods. Okay, that's achieved. We don't have to necessarily do our psychic surgery style of meditation for this specific reason or that specific reason. Ultimately, all we can do now is accelerate and smooth planetary liberation. Recently, as many of you know, we've had to deal with a lot of alternate and parallel types and forms of realities, and not necessarily just alternate parallel timelines and universes that we're all familiar with. There's specific parallel realities that had to be dealt with, which we did on the previous Equinox mass meditation, which is more of a direct opposite kind of parallel of this Earth, which is, again, not the same thing as those more permutations of alternate parallel timelines and universes, which is a different thing. Again, I don't envy anyone who's a public speaker to try to explain such difficult, convoluted phenomena. Very hard to put into words. So I don't envy us and any other public speaker. So that brings to an end this broadcast of Ground Crew Command Radio, the official speaking platform for the 144K Starseed group. Definitely join us if you want to do something about planetary liberation in a way that really does honor, but also truly channel and amplify your soul mission and soul purpose to maximum effect. That's a big part of what we're about. So join us April 1st, full moon mass meditation, and it's on Wednesday. And let's see how the 144K celebrates April Fool's Day. You're going to find out if you haven't been on any of our special advanced energy work kind of mass meditations. It's going to be fantastic. Just ask any 144K veteran. They're next level stuff. So be there, actualize in a more maximized way your soul, mission, and potential. That's a big part of what my job is. So see you there, 144karmyoflight.org, and leave a comment beneath this video on whatever platform you see this from. I do read them. And till next time, beloved ones, let's lock arms. Let's move forward together. That's the only way that's going to get us out. Time to accelerate it all. This is your loving servant, the Unknown Light Warrior. You've been listening to Ground Crew Command Radio.